According, I'll be taking the agnostic stance on whether America was justified in bombing Iran, and Rizzhan is going to be on the affirmative. Rizzhan, do you want to give the argument as to why Iran, or as to why America is justified in bombing Iran?
Yeah, so the reason why I think that America was justified in bombing Iran is just the threat of nuclear weapons that Iran has posed. Now, both legally and morally, I think that America would be justified. The legal reasons, because of something called the Caroline Doctrine. So, the Caroline Doctrine is a doctrine that is part of customary international law, which basically says that if a country um, has a preemptive threat, or if a country has an imminent threat in opposition to another country, then that other country is justified in taking preemptive action in order to stop that imminent threat. Now, given the fact that Iran had threatened multiple times to wipe Israel off the map, to attain nuclear weapons, and to assert itself over the Middle East, I think that America would be justified in thinking that Iran um, had imminent intention and was planning an imminent attack against America and its allies. And so that's why I think that both legally and morally, um, America was justified in bombing Iran. Now, the moral reasons can just be because of the fact that, look, if you have a country that's funding multiple proxies around the Middle East, so you have a country that's funding Hamas, Hamas killed 1,000 people on October 7th, by the way. They're funding Hezbollah. Hezbollah has engaged in multiple terrorist attacks throughout Israel and Lebanon. They're also funding the Houthis in Yemen, who again engaged in multiple inhumane terrorist attacks. Then why should a state that does all of these things be allowed to have nuclear weapons? It doesn't seem like there's any moral justification for why a state should be able to have nuclear weapons. And so it seems morally correct that if a terrorist and expansionist state like this aims to get nuclear weapons, that we should be able to stop it.
Okay, so number one, fix your mic. All right, and number two, I'm just gonna ask a few questions. So, did the U.S. get any authorization from the UN Council, from the UN Security Council, to do the said bombing? And also, number two, Iran is a very rational country in the sense that they want what's best for their government, right? Um, and bombing Israel is very irrational, as now the whole world is going to be on them, right? So, number one, they bombed a country that, um, most people would probably disagree with the bombing of. And also, you're on justification for them being rational. I could just send the link. And also, if we know that Iran is creating bombs, right, creating weapons, and we know that they're rational actors, is it safe to say that Iran was creating bombs for self, or isn't it safe to say that Iran was creating bombs for self protection rather than destruction? Yeah, you gotta repeat that.
Okay, so yeah, to respond to the point about whether America had authorization, again, the Caroline Doctrine states that you do not need authorization from the United Nations. So as long as the attack is imminent, and as long as there's an imminent threat to the country, then you don't need authorization. You can go ahead with the attack, as long as the attack is humane and proportional to the threat. Now, America's response was humane and proportional to the threat because America's response did not target civilian buildings, it did not target civilian infrastructure, it only targeted military infrastructure, and to my knowledge at least, no people lost their lives, so no civilians lost their lives. So the response was proportional to the threat, nobody died, nobody was injured, and the only thing that was damaged was the military infrastructure of Iran. Now, to also respond to Iran being rational, no, Iran is not a rational country. Iran is not a morally responsible country at that. Iran is an expansionist country. So what it means for a country to be expansionist is that they have an intention to dominate the region that they're in by force, not just by diplomacy, but by force. So they have the intention to take over the country. Now they've made this intention clear multiple times. So how they've made this intention clear is that again funding of proxies all across the Middle East, which have done inhumane terrorist attacks again. Hamas's attack on Israel, which Iran funded and had knowledge of, killed 1,000 people, so 1,200 people. Loads of those people were children, loads of those people were babies. And Hezbollah, again, Hezbollah has engaged in multiple terrorist attacks against Israel that pretty much self proclaimed terrorists at this point. then the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are just known for doing radical attacks, terrorist attacks all across Yemen. They're one of the main parties fueling like the Yemeni civil war. They haven't really done much to stop the Yemeni civil war. And so when you have a regime like this who makes it its intention to cause destruction across the Middle East, and we would not think it is safe for them to have nuclear weapons. And then to also like solidify that point, again, if Iran was rational, then it would not have violated multiple nuclear agreements that we've had. So like the JCPOA, they violated that multiple times. If they were rational, then they would have listened to the agreements that they have agreed to, and they wouldn't have violated them. And look, again, if they were rational, then they'd have no reason to actually violate these agreements because these agreements ensured the protection of Iran. So America was ensuring Iranian protection from people that it might see like that's their enemies. And then also you talked about self-defense. Well, no, it's clear that Iran wasn't using them or wasn't going to use them to self-defense because again, we have a lot of prior data and prior evidence which suggests that Iran is expansionist. And also, if Iran listened to the JCPOA, then they'd know. And if they listened to the agreements that had been laid out to them, they would absolutely know that they wouldn't have any reason to defend themselves because they were already guaranteed. So they already had defense guarantees with Russia, with America, with China, etc., etc. All of those countries. So all of those countries were ready to step in and defend them if they were to be attacked. So it seems that they didn't want these for self-defense purposes. They wanted these for offensive purposes.
Okay, so you said that this doctrine allows for people to bomb countries without needing any UN authorization. Okay, well, under that, conclusion, right? I think now most countries would now be justified in bombing the U.S. and U.S. in turn would be justified in bombing any other countries, which would lead to all out like fucking nuclear war, which obviously is retarded, right? So I think that even if the doctrine allowed for this, I think that the conclusion that you're reaching using it is absurd. I think it's absurd because well, again, leads to nuclear war. Also, under that reason, why aren't we just fighting bombing North Korea, right? What distincts North Korea and Iran from each other? And also for them breaking the pact, it's not necessarily that they think they could get, or it's not necessarily the fact that they think they can handle the punishments, right, of the breaking the pact. It's that they didn't think they were going to get caught, right? They didn't think they were going to get caught by breaking these nuclear pacts, so they kept continuing their enrichment of fucking uranium. They kept doing their enrichment of uranium, right? So there seems to be a case where, well, they are rational, but they also think they could get away with making these nuclear bombs. And so yeah, just reply to the Duxio and reply to that. Also, fix your mic. I can like hear like the volume, not the volume, but the vacuum in the background.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna try to fix it, but that's beside the point. So you brought up the point of if the Caroline Doctrine was true. So if the Caroline Doctrine was really a doctrine we should follow, then every country would be justified in bombing each other. Well, no, because if you actually listen to what I said that the Caroline Doctrine states that it has to be an imminent attack. So the threat has to be imminent. So obviously you can't just bomb another country if the country does not pose an imminent attack or an imminent threat to you. Now, what an imminent attack or imminent threat means is that they are planning an attack, so they're planning something to attack your civilians or your infrastructure, and that attack is also going to be done like in from anywhere from weeks to even like a year. So if they're planning a major attack or if they're planning any attack of sorts on your infrastructure, on civilian infrastructure, on civilians in general, or your country in general, then you'd be justified in preventing that attack with the necessary and sufficient force. So obviously, in cases where there is no imminent attack, a country would not be justified in bombing another country. But again, the symmetry breaker between those situations is that the threat from Iran is imminent. So the threat from Iran, which is their uranium enrichment, which is obviously going to be used to create nuclear bombs, in which we have multiple data to suggest that they would have nuclear bombs in simply just a few months if they were allowed to continue the enrichment of uranium, would suggest that again, Iran was planning an imminent attack. Iran did pose an imminent threat to America and its allies. So that would be the distinction between the two situations. So the Caroline Doctrine is still a legally and morally sound doctrine because it refers to imminent attack, not just that like you don't like another country, obviously. And then to respond to like the North Korea Iran reductio, but the distinction between North Korea and Iran is there's actually two major distinctions. The first distinction is that again Iran is expansionist and North Korea is isolationist. Now, what those two terms mean is just that an expansionist country just aims to dominate the other countries in its region via force, so via military force, and not via diplomacy. And then isolationist just means that it doesn't really care about the other countries in its region as long as those countries don't attack it, but it's mostly focused on its country. Now, North Korea is isolationist because number one, they don't attack any countries, they don't express any means to dominate other countries via military force. And number two, they mostly just stay inside their own confines of their border. So they're not funding any proxies. They're not engaged in any proxy wars. However, Iran is funding proxies and is engaged in proxy wars, which suggests that Iran is an expansionist country, whereas North Korea is not an expansionist country. And then a second distinction, so a second symmetry would just be that in one case we're preventing a country from having nuclear weapons, but in another case we're depriving a country of having nuclear weapons. So obviously, in the case of Iran, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons yet, although they're very close to getting nuclear weapons. But if you were to stop Iran's nuclear program today, that would simply mean that you're preventing it. However, if you were to stop North Korea's nuclear program, that would mean you're depriving them because when we say that you deprive somebody of something, that means that they already have that thing, but you've taken it away from it, taken it away from them. However, when you prevent somebody from having that thing, you just stop them from having that thing in the first place. So they didn't even have the chance to get that thing, which is obviously a distinction because again, in one case we're preventing a country from having nuclear weapons, in another case we're depriving a country from having nuclear weapons. So that's the other distinction. And then to go on to like the rationality point again, Iran is not a rational country because if it was rational, then it would actually abide by the UN Security Council laws. Again, it's violated the JCPOA, it's violated the United Nations Security Council laws, it's violating almost every UN nuclear deal that it agreed to. And so, how can it be possibly a rational country if it's not listening to any of the agreements that it signed? It's not like anybody forced them to sign them. They signed the agreements, and then later on violated them.
Yeah, okay. I already responded to that by saying that they didn't think they were going to get caught. That's the reason why they broke the track. They didn't think they were going to get caught because they were repeatedly not allowing some specific U.S. inspectors, right, to get into the nuclear facility. So it's not that they think they're not rational. It's just that they didn't think they're going to get caught. Number two, the North Korea is an imminent threat. Right? North Korea sent over missiles over, or missile tested over Japan. It bombed South Korea ships, right? So it just seems to be that North Korea is very hostile. So even if I do grant that it is one, right? Even if I do grant that it is an isolationist country, it just seems to be that it's obviously wanting to take over South Korea by doing these missile tests over them, by showing these acts of aggression. So yeah, right. And also that your first point is just a repetition. You haven't proved that it's for offense rather than defense. I'm asking you why why does it have to be specifically for offense, right? Why does it have to be specifically for offense? You're not giving a reason. You're saying that it is because of X reason. And once I showed how there's other interpretations to that reason, right? You just repeated it and said that it is, and it is for offense, which is what's in question. So justify why it's for off or why it's for offense. And again, if this doctrine again leads to all-out nuclear war, right? Why should we accept the doctrine at all? It just seems to be the case that you're just repeating the doctrine without explaining or why showing that it wouldn't lead to this. Why it wouldn't lead to this conclusion? The thing they were trying to, or the doctrine, if it states that you can bomb any country, because you think that there's or because they're an imminent threat. This seems to be retarded because well now North Korea is justified in bombing South Korea. China can now bomb fucking that little ass country Taiwan. right? It just needs to be the case that it's just gonna lead to these absurd conclusion where these other countries can just go around bombing whatever country that they think is an imminent threat or pose an imminent threat, right? So it seems to be the case that it leads to this conclusion. And if you think that's fine, then we can conclude because you know you're not really justifying it. So, yeah.
Okay, so look, I'm just convinced that you didn't actually track anything in which my argument had to offer. Because what I just said to you is just that when you say that somebody poses an imminent threat to you, that means that they're planning an attack, they're ready to attack you, they want to attack you, they have the intention to attack you, and they're gathering all the necessary resources in order to attack you. Now, obviously, a country like China, under that definition, would not pose an imminent threat to America because we do not have any data to suggest that China is planning an imminent attack or China is gathering the necessary resources in order to attack America or to attack America's allies. Same with North Korea. We don't have any data to suggest that. Now, the distinction between those scenarios or that scenario and the scenario with Iran is simply just the fact that we do have an extensive amount of data to suggest that Iran was planning an attack on American allies, was going to use its proxies to and further fund its proxies to attack American allies, to attack America or American bases in the Middle East. And so that's obviously the relevant distinction between the two. Again, just because you might think that country is your enemy doesn't mean that a country poses an imminent threat to you. However, the distinction is that Iran actually poses an imminent threat via the fact that it's enriching uranium, via the fact that it's expressed its intention multiple times to wipe Israel off the map. Look, it's literally said that it's going to wipe Israel off the map. And you obviously have to take those threats seriously. And so, again, the doctrine is also saying proportional to the threat. So obviously you can't go overboard when you're trying to stop an attack from happening. And Zeni, I think you'll grant that if somebody is literally planning to attack you, then you're justified in stopping that attack from happening. Look, let me just give you an example. Let's say you're walking down the street, right, and you see this person, and you've gathered an extensive amount of data to suggest that this person is going to attack you within the next 5 minutes. And in order to stop this person attacking you, you punch them in the stomach, which disables them and stops them from attacking you. Would you say that legally and morally they've done something wrong? Well, no, because it's something called self-defense. You're defending yourself from somebody that poses a threat or somebody that is ready to attack you. And obviously, I think that you'd grant that you'd be justified in stopping somebody that poses an imminent threat or an imminent attack to you or is ready or poised to attack you. Now, also to respond to you saying, the reason why they'd be rational is simply just because they wouldn't find out. I don't think that would be justification because that would simply just show that the intentions that they had would not be rational. Right. And also, just because the UN or like US nuclear personnel can't actually access the nuclear sites doesn't mean that we don't have other ways or other means to find out what Iran is doing in those nuclear sites, right? We have things like satellites, we have things like reconnaissance, we have things like spies, which all collect intelligence from Iran without Iran's knowledge. And so I don't think that you have any reason to suggest that they think that nobody would find out. I think that Iran would know that people would find out, given the fact that they know that America has been collecting intelligence on them for years, for decades now, and ever since like the Iranian Revolution. And so that's just multitude, like that's just a lot of data to suggest that Iran would know what's happening. But even if they wouldn't know, I don't see how this ties into argument of them being rational. Because again, a rational country, to me, would be a country that abides to international law. Iran violated international law. A rational country to me seems like a country that would abide to the agreements that have been proposed. Iran has violated nearly all of the agreements that have been proposed. And so that doesn't seem to me to be a rational country. That seems to be a selfless country, which doesn't really have any reason to do these things. Now, to also respond to like the self-defense point, again, I already told you what data do we have to suggest that Iran is doing this in terms of expansionist intent, and North Korea, example, would be a country that's doing it for self-defensive intent. Now, the reason why I've already said this is because Iran is funding proxies in the Middle East. Now, what does it mean to fund proxies or to be engaged in proxy wars? To fund a proxy means that you give a group, whether terrorist or not, money to carry out attacks on other places or on other nations. and you've made it your intent to dominate those countries via military force. Now, North Korea might seem a bit shady, right? They might have made like some loose-winded threats to dominate other countries via military force, but we can assume that those threats don't really mean anything because North Korea isn't funding any proxies. North Korea isn't engaged in proxy wars. However, Iran is engaged in proxy wars and is engaged um, and is funding proxies, which suggests that while North Korea might have some intention to expand, Iran is actively engaging in the act of expanding. And so the distinction between the two would just be that one is actively engaging in the act of expanding, whereas North Korea isn't actively engaging in the act of expanding, and has for the most part actually abided by international law in terms of expanding into other countries. So it's actually like respected the international borders of other countries, whereas Iran hasn't. And then to like also respond to a point about North Korea bombing South Korean ships. Again, North Korea bombing South Korea ships is a completely whole different scenario because you have one where obviously you're attacking military infrastructure, but that again, that's not the same as funding proxies. That's not the same as being engaged in proxy wars. And so you might even say that North Korea definitely violated international law there, but we can simply just assume that's a one-off because they haven't been actively engaging on some intent to cause harm or to cause destruction in the area which Iran has been doing.
Yeah. So, all right. So first of all, give the sources that Iran is ready to attack the U.S. and its allies. Right. You just keep making the claim that they will attack
I,
us. So
I
give.
I already gave the evidence. Like you want me
Uh,
to like send their enriched uranium reports? Like what?
I'm not done. All right. All right. I'm not done. So just be quiet until I'm done. So number two. Right. And how does that mean that the intentions are rational? Right. If like this, all you're doing is assuming that they're going to be irrational for these intentions. How does that mean that the intentions are rational? You got to justify that.
Yeah, I
Also,
can't hear what you're saying.
hey, I'm not done, bro. Stop cutting me off. I'll let you go on to
It's
like
not to
20
hear
minutes.
what you're saying.
Absolutely nothing. If you want me to repeat it, I can repeat it after.
Yeah, I just said. Can you repeat what you're saying?
Okay, so look, number one, give the source as to why Iran is ready to attack the U.S. and its allies. Give the source for that. Because I gave another interpretation that they're doing it for self defense rather than, fucking bombing other countures right away. Right? So,
They're already attacking.
hey,
They're
God, what?
already attacking
Stop
America
cutting me off,
civilians.
retard. Stop cutting me off, retard. Stop cutting me off. So first of all, give the source, all right? Give the source for that. And again, how does that mean that the intentions are rational, right? You're just assuming that they're going to be rational for these intentions. How does that mean the intentions are rational? You just got to give the argument for that. So then also prove that North Korea is or prove that North Korea is making these weapons for self defense. Already showed, a screenshot that North Korea poses an imminent threat to South Korea by bombing their ships, by doing missile tests over Japan, just being hostile to other nations around them. So you gotta prove that for self defense, and then prove that Iran has them, right? And also, how is it a completely different scenario? How is North Korea bombing a South Korean ship a completely different scenario to what Iran is doing right now? You gotta prove that because you're just assuming that it is a completely different scenario. I don't want the argument for that. And also, do you want to continue? Because I don't think this conversation is going anywhere. You just
No, I
repeated
want
what.
to also repeat what you said.
Do you want me to repeat everything I said right now? Dude, this guy just called me Rizzhan of the Infinity Syndicate. Like, just like give it up. Also, where did the guy just go?
Wait, hello. Yeah, I wanted to repeat wanted you to repeat what you said. Like half of it.
You want me to repeat what I said? All right, sure. Let's see. What other thing? Okay, so number one, give the force that Iran's ready to attack the U.S. and its allies. And number two, show that these intentions mean are irrational. You got to justify that. Number two, prove that North Korea is doing it for self defense because North Korea does pose an image at South Korea by making threats against South Korea, bombing South Korean ships, just all out being completely hostile to South Korea, right? And then he said that them bombing South Korea is a different scenario than what Iran is doing. Okay, you got to prove that because it seems case that these two countries are both hostile to their neighbors, both hostile to the people around them, but we're just fighting bombing one and not the other. That seems a little retarded. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So to respond to the last thing you said, so I'll just go from the bottom to top. But to respond to the last thing you said, um, I already told you that both countries can be hostile to their neighbors, but the distinction is that in one country's hostility, they're actively killing people, they're actively attacking and destroying other countries via their proxies again. So Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, um, they're terrorists in Iraq as well. They have a whole terrorist network in the whole Middle East. North Korea doesn't have this. And so both of them have a hostility, but North Korea has a much more tame hostility, which would make it be the case that Iran has more expansionist intentions. Right? Iran has made it clear that, and they've done this multiple times, they've violated international law, they've violated the integrity, so the sovereign integrity of other countries by violating like their borders, and they're also again funding multiple terrorist attacks. They funded multiple terrorist attacks. And they funded the attacks on Israel, which killed again 1,200 people, many of them which were kids. And so when you have a country doing this, you might say that both those countries are hostile, but it's clear that one country exceeds the other country in hostility to a point where you can even call that country expansionist. North Korea has a much more tame hostility, and obviously you can be isolationist and still be hostile to the other countries, as long as you don't actually engage or act on the intention to cause harm to other countries. North Korea hasn't caused harm to other countries, at least not until the point of Iran. The only harm that you can say that they've caused, like maybe in the past like decade or 2 years, 2 decades, is like the bombing or the attack on South Korean ships. But I think an attack on ships is different from engaging in wars. So active wars, starting, engaging, and funding wars, funding terrorist groups all across a region.
Oh my God, shut the
Wait,
fuck up.
but yeah, I don't know what that guy's doing because his guy is literally. So I don't see why it would be the case that we have one country that obviously might be hostile to its neighbors, and once in a while do these hostile actions or do these actions that we see violating international law. Then in another case, we have a country which, again, repeatedly engage in proxy wars, repeatedly funds its terrorists across the region in order to destabilize the region. North Korea isn't destabilizing its region. Iran is destabilizing its region. Iran is, again, funding multiple wars. North Korea is not funding multiple wars. North Korea is not engaging in any wars. Iran is engaging in multiple wars. Again, there's multiple distinctions that we can draw between Iran and North Korea, which makes us that we can bomb Iran and we can't bomb North Korea. And also, you didn't even respond to the deprivation and prevention point. Because obviously, in one case, we're depriving a country of having nuclear weapons. In another case, we're preventing a country from having nuclear weapons, which is, again, another relevant distinction. And then to respond to the point about, I can't remember what point you made. I'm pretty sure you want me to like prove that Iran posed like an imminent threat to America and Israel. It's not that it posed an imminent threat; they already did pose a threat, so the threat was already actualized. The threat was actualized again via Iran bombing Israel multiple times, via Iran using its proxies to attack Israel. So the threat was already there. Now I assume that you're talking about the imminent threat of nuclear weapons. Now the imminent threat of nuclear weapons that would be there would be its enrichment of uranium. So obviously, if a country is enriching uranium, and if we have multiple facets of data which suggest that this country could have a nuclear weapon in the next month, and they've made it their intention that once they do get nuclear weapons, that they will attack Israel, that they will wipe Israel off the map, then we should take these threats seriously. Because again, Iran is known to act on its intentions Iran isn't like North Korea. So North Korea can say something far-fetched. North Korea can say something crazy but never act on it. Whereas Iran can say something crazy and act on it. And they've done this multiple times. Like again, via the October 7th attacks. They just expressed their intention to kill Jews, to kill Israelis. And they acted on that intention. And so if Iran has a track record of acting on its intentions, um, and we have data to suggest that once Iran gets this thing it desires, it's going to get it like in the next few months. And I think that we can come to the conclusion that most likely they're going to use these nuclear weapons in order to attack America or its allies, in order to act or actualize the intentions. And so, and if you want, I can send the uranium enrichment reports, and I can also send the reports which suggest that Iran was going to get nuclear weapons in the next few months. If you want any justification for that. But given the amount of evidence that we have, all the evidence just seems to point to the fact that Iran was going to attack Israel. And even at that, Iran already was attacking Israel. Obviously, they were sending missiles over to Israel. Again, they're funding proxies in Hamas, Hezbollah, so Palestine, Lebanon, to attack Israel. And so, if we have all like those pieces of data, I think that we'd be justified in thinking that Iran, we'd be justified in thinking that Iran was going to act on its intentions. And obviously, if it acted on its intentions, that would just be launching a nuclear weapon over to Israel and succeeding in wiping Israel off the map. And then to also respond to like the self-defense point, I think we've made it pretty clear that North Korea's intention was self-defense, because North Korea has had nuclear weapons for years now, for decades, and they haven't once actually used those nuclear weapons. So they haven't once used those nuclear weapons. Anytime they've been warned by America not to use them, um, they've abided by those warnings. When Trump literally called Kim Jong-un and told him not to use nuclear weapons, Kim Jong-un listened to him. Iran doesn't listen to him. They don't listen to Trump. Iran doesn't listen to America. Iran doesn't listen to the UN. Iran has violated multiple agreements engaged in. It refuses diplomatic options, whereas North Korea does not refuse diplomatic options. Iran refuses diplomatic options. North Korea does not refuse them. So if you have a country that's unwilling to solve it diplomatically, then I'm unclear what other way you think we could solve this problem if they're not ready to do it diplomatically. But North Korea is ready to solve the problem diplomatically, and via like disarmament, via the types of nuclear weapons that they use, etc., etc. And then lastly, just to respond to the rationality point. Look, I've already given my criteria for what I think a rational thing is. Maybe under your semantics, like it's different, but under my semantics, what I think a rational country is a country that abides via international law or tries its best to abide via international law. A country that does not express expansionist intent. A country that does not fund proxy wars or terrorists. Those are all my criteria for what I think a rational country is. What I think a smart and morally rational and morally sound country is. I don't think that Iran meets this criteria. They've violated almost all of like the criteria that I've laid out. And so maybe under your semantics Iran is rational, under mine they're not rational. And so it's just a semantic dispute, but we can go over whose semantics actually captures the situation better. I think my semantics do capture the situation better.
Finally, you're done rambling. Holy shit. Okay, so them bombing, ships, right, does prove that they pose a threat, right? Because you're saying that North Korea or Iran has destroyed things. Well, North Korea has done, or North Korea has also, right? The ships, they've destroyed the ships. So that just shows that they're at least hostile to their neighbors. So how is it significant, or how is Iran and North Korea different to such a significant, um, so significant? How significant to the point where we can bomb one and not the other? That just seems pretty retarded. Because you're saying that, well, Iran has done X, North Korea has also done these things, right? You're saying that Iran has violated international law, so has fucking North Korea. They've also violated international law. So it just seems to be the case that you don't have a reason, right, as to why they're different. And all I'm proving here is that they're both hostile. And if they're both hostile, then we both have, or then under your have enough reason to bomb North Korea as we do Iran. And if we do bomb, or if we do have enough reason to bomb North Korea, then that just leads to an all-out war. So here I'm just gonna provide another thing that, or another act we can do instead of bombing countries, right? Which leads to fucking destruction and everything. We could use sanctions, right? Sanction them instead, because sanctioning is a much better option. And we've seen that every time you sanction a country, they've usually stopped what they're doing. We've sanctioned Russia, we've sanctioned China, North Korea, other countries like that, and it just seems to be the case that these countries have stopped what they're doing. So right now, it seems to be the case that sanctioning them and waiting 3 months, because it's said to be the case that they're gonna get their weapons in 3 months, their nuclear weapons in 3 months. We should sanction them for 3 months, check back upon them in 3 months, and see if they're still developing these weapons. And if they are, then I'd agree that we're justified in bombing them. But as of right now, it seems to be the case that we should instead sanction them. All right. So all in all, you just haven't given a reason as to why North Korea and Iran are different. You haven't proven that Iran is irrational. All you said was just repeat. All you've done is a repetition. I don't think you've given any argument as to why these things are the case. So do you want to conclude? Oh, wait, before that, you said that Iran acts upon its intention, well, North Korea does as well. North Korea is pretty hostile and has acted upon their intentions. Right? So, it's really dumb, bro. But yeah, do you want to conclude?
Look, I want to respond to what you said, then conclude. My response probably will be very quick. But yeah, just to respond to what you said. So firstly, you made like the dumbest point that I've ever seen somebody making, like an Iran versus America debate. And you said that, oh, America should just sanction Iran. You do understand that America has sanctioned Iran since 1979. So America has sanctioned Iran for nearly 50 years, and Iran still hasn't listened. Every time Iran has gone out of order, every time Iran has gone out of line, every time Iran has violated a nuclear agreement, America has sanctioned. So if America is ready to negotiate, Iran isn't ready to negotiate. If America is sending sanctions, Iran isn't ready to accept those sanctions. Then what other options do you think America has? Do you think America should just wait for Iran to get nuclear weapons, and then have the high probability of Iran actually using those nuclear weapons against its allies or even it? Like, do you think that's a valid or like tangible point that you can even make? Well, no, I don't think that's a valid tangible point. Because again, if you have a country that's ready to give you all the options, but you're refusing those options, what else do you want? Like, they've given you leeway, but you're not accepting the leeway. You're just being difficult about it. And if you're being difficult about it, then I don't think we have any reason to not use military force in that scenario. And then to respond to North Korea acting on its intentions, again, North Korea hasn't acted on its intentions. Hasn't acted on the same intentions that Iran has acted on. So again, Iran has made it clear that their intention is to destabilize the Middle East, to dominate the Middle East, to weaken Israel. Now, Iran has acted on those intentions multiple times, whereas North Korea hasn't acted on its intentions, for example, to unite North Korea and South Korea. They haven't acted on those intentions. The only thing they've done that makes it seem like they've acted on those intentions is bombing that one South Korea ship, which is probably the only hostile action that they've done in years. Whereas Iran has been doing multiple hostile actions basically every day for the past 20 years against Israel and in the Middle East in general. And that's probably the only hostile action that North Korea has engaged in. And that doesn't actually act on their intention to unify North Korea and South Korea, because if they wanted to act on those intentions, they'd actually send military personnel to invade South Korea and fully act on those intentions. So whereas North Korea a lot of the time seems to be bluffing, Iran does not seem to be bluffing, and Iran has a consistent track record of acting on its own intentions. And given the fact that it's acted on those intentions, we should take its intention to wipe Israel off the map with nuclear weapons seriously. Now, to also respond to the rationality point, which is the last thing we're going to respond to, obviously, I already told you that under my semantics, Iran would not be a rational country. I'm unclear on what your semantics are, hence why I've